Hi there, welcome to Michigan Weekend. I'm Fred Trost, and this evening I have a special guest. We're going to talk about bass fishing. Now, the principles he's going to teach us about bass fishing are rather unusual. He's going to take us to a crowded, busy lake in the middle of the summer, in the middle of the day, the heat of the day. We're going to fish in shallow water in lily pads. Believe me, he says this technique pays off, and it does. The fisherman we're going to be with is Bob Musselman, a noted fishing instructor, fisherman from the Kalamazoo area. Bob has caught many big bass in shallows, haven't you, Bob? For example, this stringer here, how many of these came from the shallows?
All 5 of them, Fred.
Wow, what's the biggest one?
Here's an 8-pound, 7-ounce bass.
Good grief. Find out exactly how he does it. Stay tuned. Catching lunker bass in Michigan, you say? Look at these fish right here. These bass were caught, these 5 of them are the largest bass that Bob Musselman has caught in his career as a fisherman here in Michigan. Bob, what is the range and size of these fish?
They range from 7 pounds up to this one, which is 8 pounds and 7 ounces.
Wow.
Fred.
All of these master angler trophies. It's unbelievable that these were caught in southern Michigan.
Many people think they were caught in Florida, but I can attest to the fact they were caught in Michigan.
Okay, now your technique that you use for catching a lot of these is interesting. You use a casting reel with what pound test line?
That's 12-pound test, Fred.
12 pound, and then of course when I fished with you, when you introduced me to this technique, we used this pork rind frog. And it's an interesting technique that you have, Bob. Why don't we go to the film of the day that I spent down in southern Michigan fishing with you on your 14-foot bass boat. There we were, right in the midst of the lily pads. You say this is where you can find big bass.
That's the best place to find them, right in the middle of the day.
And the thing is we were fishing in the middle of the summer.
That's right.
July, August. Fishing with these casting reels, of course, a lot of people nowadays like to go to the spin cast and so on, but casting reel has an advantage in pulling the pork rind frog through the lily pads, doesn't it?
It does. You have a direct drive with it, and you have the ultimate control with that type of a reel.
Now, I got to admit, Bob, we're going to go to the conversation that you and I had in the boat as you introduced me to this technique, but as we fished there in the heat of the day, water skiers zipping behind us, honestly, it just didn't seem right. Okay, Bob, this is where we're supposed to fish, huh?
This is it, Fred.
Okay, I only see 4 problems. Things I've read about bass fishing before, how you're supposed to do it. Here we are in the heat of the summer, number 1, right in the middle of the summer. We're here at noon in the middle of the day.
Right.
You have us here in about 3 feet of water. The bass are supposed to be out in the deep water. And number 4, this lake is built up, residential. There must be 1 million people using it. How are we going to catch bass?
Fortunately, Fred, hardly anyone fishes in these thick lily pads.
It's no wonder. They've been reading the same articles I have.
Well, we have a method that we use in the lily pads. You can't just use any old lure in here because you're going to get hung up.
Sure.
So we use that little pork frog that I was showing you.
Okay, well show me how you do this with a casting reel.
All right, fine, with a casting reel. We make very short casts, maybe 20, 25-foot cast, and the frog lands on a lily pad because there's very little water there.
Okay.
We start working that, and we see those little pockets of water, and we want to get that to drop into the pocket of water so the bass can at least get at it. Okay, it's sitting on a lily pad now, and I'm going to slip that into the water. Now, if there was a big bass there, he would have hit that, Fred, but there's no big bass right there. Well, that's how you work it, very slowly. Slip it off the pads. They think it's a frog, and frog is a good meal for them, and that's what they want. Here, try it, Fred.
I'm going to give it a fling. Well, I like these new bait casting reels.
Yes.
Flip it right out there without a backlash. Okay, just work it over. But explain to me, Bob, why everything I've read says that bass are not found in the shallow water in the heat of the day in the middle of the summer. They're out in the deep water.
Many bass are out in the deep water, but as you can see, this type of weed cover is very thick. And it's so thick, in fact, that there's very little water showing. It looks like you and I could almost get out there and do some walking. The bass will lie under here because there's almost an unlimited supply of food. There are schools of minnows, there's lots of insects, and many people don't realize this, but bass eat insects. They eat what we call aquatic insects, which will cling to the stems of these lily pads.
Dragonflies
See, you had
and
an
such?
overrun there.
Well,
Fred. That's all right.
No big deal.
Sure. And the bass will be near their food supply because they don't want to have to go halfway across the lake to get a meal. The meal is right there for them. They have plenty of shelter from the sun. They don't have eyelids like you and I, and they're very sensitive to the sun. And as you can see by this thick pad cover here, if the bass are under there, they're in the shade. And another thing, the water is very cool under there. The sun's rays aren't penetrating down through there to warm up the water.
So what you're saying is, Bob, that this offers all the protection, all the food that the deep water does for the bass, right?
That's right, and it's easier to find the fish here.
Except it's sort of a pain to fish it.
Well, yes, but the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. When you catch an 8-pound bass out of here, Fred, you're never going to complain about the fact that it's a pain to fish it.
Right.
Or even a 4-pounder, I think we'd settle for.
I'll take that. So this is, how do we know when to move on? When we've covered an area, how long do we sit
Well,
here?
we don't cover an area very thoroughly. We will fan our casts so that we're not going to cast in the same spot every time. And once we've fanned our casts within the radius of our casting distance, then we will move on.
Move on, okay.
About 50 feet or so, and then fan our casts in that area.
What lure are you going to be using?
In here,
Yeah.
I'm going to be using the same thing you are, Fred.
Okay.
That's about the only thing that we can use in these real heavy lily pads.
Why don't we move up another 50 feet and do it to
Sure,
it?
let's
See
do
what
that.
we can,
Fine.
see what we've come up with. Well, that was our conversation, Bob. You remember that? That day I was a bit skeptical out amongst the lily pads, but I tell you, it's always fascinating fishing with you. Your knowledge is incredible about bass. But not only that, your ingenuity. For example, on that bass boat, I don't think really our viewers could see all the features of that boat. So what we're going to do, Bob, is we're going to come back, and before we get into the bass and the fish, we're going to talk about that bass boat in just a minute. I've always said, if you want to learn about bass fishing from somebody who knows, you got to find some guy who catches 7- and 8-pound bass for fun. Ask him those questions. That guy's sitting right here, Bob Musselman. Bob, you're just a font of knowledge when it comes to bass fishing, but I've really been impressed by the equipment and the things you've developed on your bass boat, inexpensively. Now, obviously, it doesn't take a $8,000 or $10,000 bass boat to catch bass, right?
It's not necessary at all, Fred. For a very small investment, you can tailor a boat, make it the way you want it, so it'll be comfortable for you.
Okay, your boat is just a 14-footer, just a regular fishing boat, right?
That's right.
You put a modest motor on the back, 25 horse, and from there, you put $800 or so into it?
About that much, yes, Fred.
A homemade bass boat. And you have all the luxuries, I think, of a big, fancy, expensive boat.
I sure do, and I can get in the shallow water, whereas those big boats can't.
Well, let's go back for the benefit of our audience to that day that we were fishing beside the lake and let you give us a tour of your homemade bass boat.
The motor? Well, this is an electric motor, has a 12-volt battery, and this little doodad here is a weed guard. And this allows us to go through very heavy weed cover, for instance, through lily pads. Without this, the weeds would get around the prop and the motor would go nowhere.
Okay, well, let's look at some of the other features you have here on your homemade customized bass boat. Let's see, what's in here? Is this your...
Well, that's the 12-volt battery, which operates the electric motor. And then I have a couple of...
little buoys you throw out when you catch a fish? So
That's right. That's right, to mark the spots.
Okay, now what about these characteristic seats here on a bass boat? Did these come with this boat?
No, they didn't. Those are custom seats that I had.
So you put in the seats?
Yes, I did.
How much do those run?
Oh, they run about $35 a piece. They're a cushioned seat with a fold-down back on them.
Okay. What about these railings here?
I had those installed so that if I tie up to a dock, I can tie very easily to this.
Okay. Now you store your lures in this little foam padding. Geez, they come out and hang in there real easily.
That's right. I take these lures out before I start fishing. I don't like to open the tackle box in the boat. It makes noise. So I take the lures out, and all of the lures that I figure I'll fish with that day, I will line up on this foam.
Super idea. Super idea. Well, what about the carpeting? I assume that's in there for noise?
That's right. It's for noise and to keep from slipping. Sometimes the bottom of a boat will get very slippery, especially if you've caught some fish and they've been flopping around. So we put carpeting on there to deaden the noise, to deaden the sound, so we don't scare fish, and also to keep from slipping down on the boat.
Well, that couldn't have cost much to make those improvements. What about your rod racks here?
Well, I like to have my rods out of the way, tucked out of the way, and we can store them here. I store them here all the time, even when I'm not using the boat on a fishing trip. And they can hold 6 rods. I have 3 in there now.
Okay, let's see, you mounted a little ruler here so you can measure your fish.
That's right, that's glued down.
What about the console? Did this come with the boat?
No, it didn't. I bought that separately, and that's an electric start console. We can operate from the middle seat here.
Okay, well let's move on down here, see what else we have. What's in here?
That's just a storage compartment, Fred. And sometimes if we're pike fishing, catch some long pike, we'll put those in here also.
Alrighty, you could use that as a cooler probably to take some cold drinks out on the boat with you. And your motor, just a modest 25 horse, not like those big 85s or some of the big ones they use on the expensive bass boats.
That's right.
Electric start, here's your battery. Okay, what do we have under this compartment? What's this?
Well, that's our live well, Fred. And I've installed a little thing there that allows the water to come in from the lake, so we have circulation.